talking to Scott beforehand, I think I mentioned to you like he was a little anxious. I won't say nervous, but he was a little anxious about being the MC because it's not a role that he's played before. But he's such a pro, and I'm sure he did a great job, making those connections. And I always think about conferences, especially the ones that that you put on and that we've put on in the past. It's like, when you're a small credit union, sort of like one of the the major challenges you face is like just people, right? Like you don't have a lot of people in your organization. You don't have a lot, like you don't have as many people to brainstorm and come up with creative ideas. And so it really becomes imperative that you get out there into the credit union community to expose yourself to the other ideas that some of these other credit unions have. And like we're so lucky that we work in an industry where, not necessarily like competitors, but different businesses who in some cases may serve, similar markets are so willing to like get in a room together and just talk about business strategy and the things that they're doing to try to resonate with consumers and potential members, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's such a unique thing. And, whenever we tried to sort of define what a successful small credit union was, those who are really active in the credit union community are doing well. And I think, the very reason for that is because they're consuming all of these great ideas that they're hearing from other credit unions and they're implementing them at their shops. And so, you get 116 people, 116 credit union leaders in a room together, you're going to have just,
Yeah.
a ton of ideas shared and come away with so many different things. And sometimes it can just be one, right? Like, I mean, when you're small and, your income is limited and your margins are thin, like sometimes it's just that one idea that adds to your loan growth
Mm.
that's going to make the difference between a positive year and a negative year, for your
Yep.
credit. And so that one idea is really
100%.
powerful, but at conferences like that, it's never just one idea. It's dozens upon dozens of ideas,
Yeah.
and it requires really good handwriting and really good note taking. I think that
Yeah.
should be like a required pre-conference session is how to organize and take
That's a
notes
good idea.
at your
It's a great idea.
conferences. Rich, thank you so much for joining the Credit Union Nation podcast.
It's an honor. It really, truly is wonderful to have this opportunity to chat with you. So appreciate being invited.
Yes, absolutely. And you and I go way back before our overlapping at America's Credit Unions, back
Mhm.
to your league days. But I and your well, I guess I didn't know you when you were working for credit unions. But can you just share a little bit about your current role, what you do at ACU, and also just kind of your credit union journey a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so my current role, I am director of membership. I focus on our credit unions 250 million and below. And with that, I have the wonderful opportunity to work with our small credit union community and our small credit union committee. And there's so many resources available to our small credit unions through America's credit unions. And it's inspiring and um, I'm moved every single day because there's so much passion in small credit unions. And my journey really started with small credit unions. I started out at the time, gosh, I think they were 25 million dollar credit union in Colorado. And then moved my way up to a big credit union that at the time was 300 million. And just kind of found my way into league and association work. And a lot of that just had to do with getting involved in outside activities, getting involved on leadership development committees and chapter boards and those type of things where I found myself spending a lot of work time on ancillary projects that seemed to make an impact. And that's where I really felt moved to move towards. And so that's where I got involved in league and association work, working with the Colorado Credit Union League, and then I became Mountain West, which became Go West, and now I am honored, truly honored to be working for America's Credit Unions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been fun sort of working with you in various capacities over the years.
Yeah.
I think people probably don't know that the first time that we worked together was when you were with Mountain West, and it was right at
Mhm.
the time that Mountain West was transitioning to Go West, through that merger. And the first ever sort of small credit union conference that CUNA put on, now America's Credit
Mhm.
Unions, was an event that we put on in partnership with you. And so you and I and a couple of other league representatives sort of put together this like concept for a small credit union conference where we had a lot of panels and practitioners and keynote speakers.
Yeah.
It was fun, sort of getting to know you then, and I'm so glad that you've stayed, close and now sort of run
Mhm.
the small credit union programming there. It's such a great fit. And speaking of conferences, you guys just had your first of the year in Spokane, sort of in partnership with Go West. I don't know what the dynamics are, with the league involvement now, but just curious to know how that event went. What were some of the big
Yeah.
takeaways, and what did you learn during that conference?
Yeah. Well, first of all, speaking to that history, that conference in Utah really set the stage, and the concept of doing regional conferences, and what was really obvious and evident in Spokane was the attendee list. So we ended up with about 116, 118 folks attending, which is a great number. We
Yeah,
had
awesome.
13 sponsors, which was amazing as well, and more sponsors that wanted to be there. We just ran out of space. So really fantastic, all the support that's out there right now for small credit unions. But the regional aspect. So of those 118, 120 folks that were there, I keep adding two every time. Did you notice that? But of those folks that were there, I would say 60% of them were Washington, Oregon credit unions.
Great.
Every small credit union in Washington, in Spokane, was there. Lots of folks drove from, we had some folks drive from Montana, Idaho, Oregon. Obviously, some people flew because Eastern Washington to Western Washington, it's a big state, but it was really, really well represented. But we also had people there from Hawaii and Connecticut and Florida and New York and Mississippi and Arkansas. So it was still a national event with a regional feel. And that concept of being able to work with the local region and make it easier. It's tough to fly across country to Washington, D.C. for GAC, for example, or getting down to Florida from one end of the country to the other end of the country. It's challenging to do for anyone, but especially a small credit union, because there's expense involved and there's time involved. And um, so it was great to work with the local league and work with the Go West Credit Union Association, because they've got a lot of that knowledge of who some of the leaders are in the region. One of our first panels was led by Scott Pryor, and Scott Pryor he's the CEO of CU Connect, or I'm sorry, Connection Credit Union. I'm giving you a new title, Scott, but Connection Credit Union there in Washington State, and they do a lot of work bringing folks together. And the title of the panel was CEO Collaboration. And so Scott gathered four regional CEOs. They got up on stage and talked about the way they collaborate and they support each other and they work together to find partners and to negotiate contracts and to vent to each other. And one of the cool things about it, and I actually got the chills, is one of the panelists at the very end said to the whole room, "Hey, if anyone out there wants to join one of our calls, just let us know." So it's welcome to everybody. It's not our little tight-knit group and we're talking and doing these things. It's we're talking and doing these things, but you can be part of it too. And that was really a kind of a cool concept. So if I didn't connect with the local league and region, I might not have known about that group to have a panel to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Scott and I are actually both board members for the CU De Novo Collective Foundation, which is the organization started by Denise Wymore to,
Yeah.
help new credit unions earn their charters. And Scott and I have known, each other for a number of years back with my time, working with small credit unions for the National Association. And, I've always really appreciated not only his, like willingness to collaborate and sort of walk the talk from that standpoint. But
Yeah.
also like he is building things, right? Like he's building opportunities for small credit unions to collaborate.
Yep.
And he also focuses on advocacy and is sort of tackling some of those big picture issues, that we talk about, technology. And I think has a core, not a core, but a QSO that he's creating. I forget the name of it. Do you know the name of it?
I want to say CU's Unite.
CU's Unite. That sounds right. That
Yeah,
sounds right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's right. Yeah.
So Scott, there you go. Shout out to
Yeah,
CU's
Scott out
Unite.
the shot.
But great,
For sure.
absolutely great credit union leader, really passionate about supporting small credit unions and runs a great credit union himself. So it's great that you got to have him at the event. So any other like really standout moments, what were some of the big takeaways and or any other sort of wow moments during the conference?
Man, there were so many, and it's hard to. There were so many, and yet when you try and think of them, it's hard to like. Oh yeah, but we just mentioned Denise Wymore, and I reached out to her as well to say, hey, dealer's choice, I'd love you to lead a panel, and she put together an all-star panel of Terry Robinson, Charlotte Nemec, and Gene Pelham to talk about member loyalty and
Mm,
what that means. And they talked, about Net Promoter Score and what does loyalty really mean. And each one of them had a very unique and very different story. But there were people taking notes saying, I could do that. I could do that. In fact, I had someone come up after the conference saying, we went and looked at Office Depot to find some boxes that we could create because we want to give a swag out, kind of like what Terry does at Ironworkers. We can do that. And
mm,
so and she loves telling that story, and she just won a Herb Wegner Award. And so that story is inspiring and it inspires others. And so when you walk away from the conference and you see, yeah, I can do that. I can learn from that. I can grow from that. That's something I can do. Then you realize, all right, we're making an impact and we're making a difference, and that's what the point is. That's the point. And going back to that event in Salt Lake, that first event we did together, that was one of the original concepts is small credit unions need takeaways. When you go to some of those large conferences, there's so much being thrown at you, and you walk away and you aren't really sure how do I put that into practice? Because the panel had billion dollar credit unions on it, and I understand what they're doing, but I'm not quite sure how to make that work for me at 33 million. And so those your peers are up on stage this time. The largest credit union we had on stage might have been Canopy at just over 250 million. So, I
mhm.
mean, we're not talking the billion dollar shops, right? And there's plenty to learn from them as well. But it's like, all right, these are my people, and I can do that. And everyone was sharing their email addresses and wanting to continue the conversation. And your little network just got bigger, and that's really the idea. So yeah, that was a standout panel. We talked a lot about Scott being the MC because he was able to weave together a lot of the conversations and tie them one to another. And so that was great because I think the flow worked really well, Tom. We started out talking about collaboration, and that was kind of the cornerstone for all the other discussions. It all kind of led back to that because we had collaboration, and then we had our keynote speaker. Well, our keynote speaker was actually, I don't know if you've ever worked with Taylor Murray, but he tells the credit union history story in a way that just you're smiling throughout because you're like learning things. We know the credit union history story, but you're
Yeah,
learning
yeah, yeah.
things. You realize, wow, there really is a credit union Mount Rushmore, and who some of those faces are, and telling the story of Louise Herring and telling the story of Roy Bergengren, and so you kind of start out with that as a basis, and then you talk about collaboration, and then you talk about advocacy, which was a big part of it too, and not just advocacy. Here's what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. It was here's what's happening, and here's how you can get involved. And here's how you can get involved locally and nationally. Another reason the Go West relationship works so well was because they're really good at local advocacy. They're fantastic at it. And so that message resonated with folks to say, hey, I can do this. I can go to day at the Capitol do a letter writing campaign. And there's a lot of tools out there that are part of that as well. The MAP program, the Project Zip Code, there's all kinds of tools that credit unions can just turnkey get involved in and be involved in that. So sharing that message was important as well. I'm just trying to think of the agenda because it really did flow well, and some of the keynote speakers and panels meshed within each other, and the conversations continued. The fintech phobia panel, we talked a lot about how do I find the right partner,
Mm.
and how do I weave through the mess to find those partners that can actually help. And we turn that into more of a conversation rather than a Q&A panel discussion. And Melanie Kennedy was up on that as well. She's the CEO of an $83 million credit union that does not have, they have an office, but it's a non-walk-in office.
Hmm.
And the cool thing is she shared the idea that it became reality during COVID because it was easier to implement and everyone had to stay home anyway. But the concept came from her board 5 years earlier. Like
Okay.
we need to be more efficient, and we need to make a non-walk-in office because we don't sometimes we shut down at lunchtime to serve the 67 members that walk in and line out the door, but we turn our phones off to serve those members that are walking in the door. And it's always the same group every week. We can still serve them, and those 67 might not like it, but we're bigger than that. And so they have a completely different concept, but they can't do that alone, right? They need phone partners and texting partners and core partners and partners to make that happen and work. And so having someone up there, 83 million, saying this is how we did it and we're kind of fearless about it is inspiring. And others realize, okay, one of her ideas came from a text group they had by watching Game of Thrones, and there was an ad that kept being thrown throughout the podcast, and that ad was for I'm gonna mess this one up. Text line, maybe it was text line, but anyways, that ad kept popping up during the podcast, and so Melanie thought, huh, they have a free trial. I'll give them a call, and they still use text line. And
Oh,
so they
wow.
still use that because they're listening to a Game of Thrones podcast. So the idea is ideas can come from anywhere. You're getting them here at the event, but be open, and be creative. And that was another that led right into our conversation with Julie Ferguson about creative member development, creative business development.
Mm.
Ideas are everywhere. Creativity is everywhere, and you just have to activate it. And there's ways to do that by spending a lot of money, and there's ways to do that by not spending any money, and just being creative and activating that. And so when they talk about creative, grabbing a getting something from a podcast,
Yeah.
the ideas are everywhere. And so that was really the idea there. Word of mouth. We talked about that one. Succession planning kind of rounded out day one. And
Mm.
this is a long answer, Tom.
That's okay. Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
mean, there's always great content at these conferences, right? So it's not an easy one line response ever, I'm sure, right?
no. And it went so fast, and they build on each other, and you learn from things because we had a break after every speaker when we did our conference in Charlotte. And it was so hard getting everyone back in the room
Yes.
because
Yeah.
people leave, and yeah, they get their snack and they use the restroom and that type of thing, but they start chatting with each other, and you've
Yeah, a
got
five
another
minute a five
great.
minute break is never a 5 minute break.
Oh
Yeah, you can always add
no,
10 minutes on top of whatever timeline you give people.
they're not. You don't want to keep them captive. You need that break, and they want to talk to each other, so we tried to make the breaks a little bit longer. Anyways, but yeah, that was hard to bring people back in the room to continue. But they came back and kept learning and kept asking questions and engaging with each speaker and each panel. Dee Dee Myers talking about succession planning from a holistic standpoint and throwing
Mm,
some stats out there that were really helpful to understand who are we trying to hire, and understanding the current generation and understanding some of the gaps in learning and the different ways people learn and some of the gaps. We explored the gaps in our own learning, and just kind of getting a new understanding for that. And it was not only how do we find new employees, but how do we train the people that are in our room to be that next leader.
mm,
So it
mm.
was just day one.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it sounded like it was a great event. Talking to Scott beforehand, I think I mentioned to you like he was a little anxious. I won't say nervous, but he was a little anxious about being the MC because it's not a role that he's played before. But he's such a pro, and I'm sure he did a great job, making those connections. And I always think about conferences, especially the ones that you put on and that we've put on in the past. It's like, when you're a small credit union, sort of like one of the the major challenges you face is like just people, right? Like you don't have a lot of people in your organization. You don't have as many people to brainstorm and come up with creative ideas. And so it really becomes imperative that you get out there into the credit union community to expose yourself to the other ideas that some of these other credit unions have. And like, we're so lucky that we work in an industry where, not necessarily like competitors, but, different businesses who in some cases may serve, similar markets are so willing to like get in a room together and just talk about business strategy and the things that they're doing to try to resonate with consumers and potential members, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's such a unique thing. And, whenever we tried to sort of define what a successful small credit union was, those who are really active in the credit union community are doing well. And I think, the very reason for that is because they're consuming all of these great ideas that they're hearing from other credit unions and they're implementing them at their shops. And so, you get 116 people, 116 credit union leaders in a room together, you're going to have just,
Yeah.
a ton of ideas shared and come away with so many different things. And sometimes it can just be one, right? Like, I mean, when you're small and, your income is limited and your margins are thin, like sometimes it's just that one idea that adds to your loan growth
Mhm.
that's going to make the difference between a positive year and a negative year, for your
Yep.
credit. And so that one idea is really
100%.
powerful, but at conferences like that, it's never just one idea. It's dozens upon dozens of ideas,
Yeah.
and it requires really good handwriting and really good note taking. I think that
Yeah.
should be like a required pre-conference session is how to organize and take
That's a
notes
good idea.
at your
It's a great
conferences.
idea.
Okay, so very, very great success for the Spokane event. Congratulations on that. I know that there is another one coming up a little bit later in the year. Can you give us the
Hmm.
details on the next Small Credit Union Conference, when and where, who you're partnering with, and maybe goals for that event or how it might be a little bit different at the next event?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for queuing that up. And the next event is scheduled for the fall. So we're looking at November 16th through 18th. When I say 3 days, the first day is really a day to gather. And the first evening we get together at a networking reception where that sets the stage, right? You have a chance for a couple of words of welcome, but the room is just full of your friends and people you haven't seen for a long time and people you've never seen before. And that really just sets the tone is having that. So we'll have an opening reception on the 16th of November, and we'll wrap things up on the 18th of November. We also try and make them in somewhat earlier in the day, so you can travel back and get back to work and not be out too long. So 16th through 18th, the location is in Kansas City, Missouri. We do not yet have the venue nailed down. It's a little more complicated than I thought. And these things keep growing, Tom. One of the cool things that you did back in some of the first ones of these was actually find a credit union to host it and go into a credit union location, which makes it wonderful, right? Because we stay within the family, stay within the movement. The
Yes.
problem we had in Spokane and we're having in Kansas City is finding a place big enough, not only to hold everyone, mostly to hold the sponsors, and then the food and that type of thing. And so we've kind of gone to going to different locations, and going to hotels that are conference centers that can do it all in one. So we're working on that right now to find the location Conceptually, again, I'll work with the Cornerstone League wherever we've already had some conversations about that. They've been helpful in looking for locations and parts of town, maybe to avoid parts of town that have lots of restaurants and resources available. The other thing that we kind of implemented by accident in Charlotte was on Monday night, it's like, all right, take a break, go have some dinner with your friends and dinner on your own, and we'll see you Tuesday morning. In Charlotte, it was a really weird time because it was hurricane season, and
Mm,
we had a hurricane just go through North and South Carolina and Tennessee and kind of affect inland more than usual. And while we were at the conference, there was a hurricane going through Florida, going through Tampa, and so we were like, let's try and gather because we are a movement. Let's help our friends. And so we got together and had a dinner sponsored by True Stage, who's an amazing partner, and I love them for what they do for small credit unions. And we got
thank you,
together,
Drew
had
Stage.
dinner. Yes, yes, thank you, True Stage, and raised money for CU Aid. And so it was like, wow, that
Awesome.
felt good. And so I thought, how can we kind of continue that? So put it in Go West hands to say, how can we make an impact in Spokane? And so Monday after our program, it was a long day. I mean, I just gave you the agenda for day one. Monday, we got together after the final event and built bikes for kids and donated them to the Spokane Bike Swap, who then in turn found families that needed bikes, and then some of the others will go into their auction, raising money for bike programs and families in need and that type of thing. So it was like, wow, that's a cool way to get engaged. And they might want to do a safety check on some of those bikes. I don't know if all the bolts were tightened the way they should be. Maybe a wheel or two was put on backwards, but the idea was there, and we made an impact in Spokane. So we'll do something similar in Kansas City. How can we make an impact on the region and give back? And so that was kind of another cool piece of it. So that's what we're looking at. Programming wise, it'll be the same. We did have a speaker on AI day two. So we focused more on technology. There's always try and build in a workshop because it's really good to get hands-on and kind of
Yep.
take what you've learned and put that together. Tyler Valentine did a fantastic job leading that. Really good comments on that, and then kind of wrapping it all up. So it'll be a similar concept, a lot of the same type of flow. Whatever's impactful at that time, we'll make sure there's a session on it. We'll look at the local leaders and find folks that have strong, powerful messages they can deliver. Again, I imagine there'll be a lot of Cornerstone region credit unions there, but Kansas City, I mean, you're in Missouri, you're bordering Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas. There's a lot of states, somewhat that can get in and out of there pretty regionally easily. And it's middle of the country, so it's not a cross-country flight to get there. So I anticipate another strongly attended event with great information shared.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure it will be. Absolutely. So, looking forward to seeing how that event turns out. I think it'll obviously be
Yeah,
well attended. Yeah, I mean, we did partner with hotels a couple of times. And I know that adds to your costs, right? Like, I think, one of the big benefits of partnering with a large credit union is that, like, they give you the space typically for free. And then you can cater in the food that you like. And like all those costs that tend to really increase when you work with a hotel conference center, like the AV and all that stuff, like that really goes up. That
yeah,
said, because you're getting such great engagement from the sponsor side, like, you know, you tend to have a little bit more flexibility, more budget for those things. So
yeah,
um,
because that's the
either
biggest
way,
expense.
yeah, either way, it's going to be a great success. So looking forward to seeing how it turns out. Okay, so last question here. How are things going at ACU? At ACU, you do a heck of a lot more than just put on conferences for small credit unions. What else are you working on? And how are things going in this first year or so that you've been in the role?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. Less than a year. I think I officially started in June of
Okay,
2024.
so we haven't made it to the
So
1 year anniversary just yet.
haven't quite made it to the 1 year anniversary. And there really is a lot. One of the biggest things for me was getting engaged and involved with the small credit union committee that was started 23, 24 years ago by our good recently retired friend Mike Shank. Such a bummer that he retired, but so happy for him to have made such an impact and to show that passion. But he and Bob Hoyle back in the day started this idea of the small credit union committee to give voice to small credit union leaders. And so we had some transition on that board while my time was there. So a great board was in place already. A lot of those folks carried over to a new term. And then we have a new small credit union committee that's got a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and I learn every day from that committee and love working with them. And that committee continues to provide voices and leaders that are advocating for small credit unions. Karen Madry testified before Congress. She recently wrote or was part of an op-ed that was published. Deborah Fears, our current chair, and I think a couple of your previous guests were featured as well in op-eds. And so that there's a lot of leaders within that group, a lot of strong voices that are being elevated and put up there with other passionate leaders throughout the movement. So working with that committee has been great, and coming up with other ideas of things to do and ways to make an impact in 2020. I guess it was the 2024 project that we released in 2025. We did an organization chart project where credit unions shared their org charts and then gave a little bit of documentation as to what their growth plans are and what they're trying to do and future positions they're looking for. And some credit unions are really unique. They have a position for a certain role and then they told why. And so hopefully that turns out to be a really good resource that credit union leaders can use as they're trying to grow and add new staff. There's a succession planning rule in place now, so hopefully maybe some of that can be used to help credit unions with that concept. And we're looking at areas that are affecting small credit unions right now and how can we make an impact with the project for 2025? What exactly is that going to look like? So a lot of work with that. Our entire website, America's Credit Union's website, got revamped. And within that, I think we have some opportunity to grow the resources that we share. We don't do it all. We certainly don't do it all, but what we do, we want to make sure you have access to and find ways to get information. If you're coming to America's Credit Unions to find something about getting an answer for something, there's a lot of our partners out there that are doing the good work. Succession planning, CDFI grant writing. I'm looking at you, Tom. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that are being done that our partners are doing, and then partnering with our friends at CSS and Barb Lohman and some of the great work that they're doing to find and vet those partners. It's a lot of work to figure out who are the partners that I can trust. And when you've got a group of those that have already been vetted, your due diligence is easier and you feel confident going into that, because making a financial decision like that is a big thing for a small budget. So a lot of work like that. There's a lot of continued work. We'll be going into that. Our monthly newsletter, getting the community going again. Exciting news for you, Tom, is we are looking, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this, but we are upgrading our community software,
Mm.
trying to make a better user experience. And so just getting more, the small credit community is robust. There are a lot of people in the small credit community sharing ideas and helping each other through challenges. And so pointing a light on that. And the key thing about that is you're not alone. If you've got an issue, if you've got a question, if you need a policy, there's someone there to share. And the community is a big part of that. So yeah, there's no shortage. There's no shortage of work. There's no shortage of projects, and there's no shortage of passion. And again, it's just bringing those small credit leaders together to have the good conversations and move the movement forward. Together we move, right?
Yeah.
That's our tagline, and it's true. It's true. And yeah, America's Credit Unions advocacy. That there's a lot of question marks about what's happening at that level. And so making every committee meeting, we bring in someone from our advocacy team to say, okay, what does this mean? And what does this mean to small credit unions? And
Mm.
right now we don't have a lot of those answers yet. But it's getting the word out there about what's happening, letting people know that, hey, we're on top of this, we're paying attention, and trying to get you. So advocacy will always be part of our conferences because I think it's important and our voices are important and getting engaged is important and learning how to do it is what makes it all work. So,
Yeah, I mean, it really is so necessary. I mean, I know, when we talked about like engagement and membership, back in the day, we were like, okay, small credit unions, they don't need the advocacy as much. They don't think about it as much because they're so focused on operations and like keeping the lights on a day-to-day basis. Whereas the larger credit unions, they're really focused on advocacy because like little changes and nuances in policy will have, sort of outsized impacts on their bottom lines, or can, I guess you could say. But the fact is, especially as it relates to the tax status, if the tax status were to go away, and that's like the issue that I think, we're focused on now. I know that a monkey wrench got sort of thrown into that yesterday when Todd Harper and Tanya Otsuka were removed from the board, and we're still like
yeah.
right in sort of the heart of the aftermath of that decision by the Trump administration. So we'll see how that all plays out. But
Mhm.
it has been, and at GAC, the focus I know was on the tax status. And for small credit unions, if the tax status were to go away and credit unions were to be taxed, it would be such a significant sort of chunk of their bottom lines, of their overall revenue, that it would just truly put them out of business. A huge majority of small credit unions, they just would not be able to afford the loss in income that they would lose, without, that tax exemption. And so, while it may not be the first thing that a CEO of a small credit union wakes up and thinks about, when they're thinking about all the things that they need to do for their credit union, it should be, right up there, because it's really, really important. And, the fact is, small credit unions have the strongest stories, and can paint sometimes the most clear picture about the impact that credit unions and their not-for-profit tax status make on the communities they serve. And so, you really leverage, sort of the channels that America's Credit Unions has to get involved in advocacy. I mean, you guys make it easy for credit unions to participate, but you still need that participation, right, from the credit union side. And so, highly encourage
Absolutely.
credit unions to stay active, stay engaged on all issues, but definitely the tax status. And I guess we'll see where the NCUA ends up with this whole issue. And I
Yeah,
also want to say,
there's a
like, for
lot of
Todd Harper in particular, the Small Credit Union Committee met with
mhm,
Tanya Otsuka last year, and she was really lovely and was really open-minded to some of the things that the committee brought. But like Todd Harper,
mhm,
I mean, he drove a lot of initiatives for small credit unions. I mean, he made sure in NCUA budgets that there were resources and dollars available to help small credit unions, through the examiner support program, the CECL worksheet. I know he was a huge proponent and
yeah,
advocate for the creation of that worksheet, which is now used by small credit unions across the country. So like
yeah,
wherever Todd ends up and wherever this whole process ends up with Todd's tenure on the NCUA, a
and
huge thank you to him, and kudos to him for always keeping small credit unions on the radar and dedicating resources to the way that NCUA supported small credit unions. Should not be go unsaid, or it should not go unsaid, or go unnoticed, because he did a
mhm,
lot. So thank you, Todd Harper. If you're out there listening, really
yes,
appreciate it.
yeah, truly, truly, yeah. He even during the succession planning ruling, he made it a point to get together, and he had a really short window, but he gave 30 minutes. He's like, gather some small credit union leaders. I want to hear what your thoughts are, and those thoughts impacted the rule that was made. It wasn't completely what we asked for, but he listened. And that's huge. The fact that the listening took place. And so yes, huge thank you to both of those outgoing leaders, and thank you to Chairman Hopman because he's listening as well. At this year's meeting, he realized, a lot of small credit unions, their biggest issues with the NCUA isn't me, it's not the board, it's the examiner, and that's where it really translates. And so he brought Kelly Lay, who is in charge of that for the NCUA, and she sat at the table and took notes and asked questions. And so NCUA is listening, and they want to know, and they want to hear from our small credit unions, and that's huge. And your lawmakers want to hear from you too. When you go into a room with a lawmaker and they realize a small credit union's there that serves iron workers, that serves teachers, that serves police officers, boom, they perk up because that's their people. They know those people. And when you are representing them, they want to hear from you. Okay, I didn't thought about that. I didn't think how this might affect the local police officers. Okay, I'll think about that differently, right? So they want to hear from you, and your stories are critically important.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Very well said, Rich. Well, I think with that, we are going to sign off for this episode of Credit Union Nation. I want to say a huge thank you to Rich Mohr, Director of Membership at America's Credit Unions, for joining me for this episode. Really appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking to you, and keep up the great work out there.
Dude, you too, my friend. It was fun.